The beep that changed everything. Jack Morrison never expected his life to change on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. The sun was high in the sky, casting golden rays over the quiet suburban neighborhood, where nothing ever seemed to happen. His backyard, a modest patch of grass enclosed by a wooden fence, had always been a place of peace, a refuge from the chaos of the world. But today, that tranquility was about to be shattered. He was out there with his metal detector, a relic from his late father, hoping to uncover lost coins or maybe an old tool buried under the dirt. It was just a hobby, something to keep his hands busy and his mind clear. But as he swept the device across the ground, a loud, unnatural beep pierced the air, sharper and more urgent than usual. Jack frowned. He had found plenty of junk in his time: bottle caps, nails, the occasional buried pipe. But this sound was different. It wasn't just a signal of something metallic beneath the surface. It was something deep, something dense, like the very earth was trying to warn him. Curiosity ignited in his chest, and he dropped to his knees, digging with his hands before reaching for the small shovel nearby. The soil was looser than expected, as if it had been disturbed before. With each scoop, his heartbeat quickened, a strange sensation creeping into his bones. Then, his shovel hit something solid. Jack sucked in a sharp breath and cleared away the dirt. What he uncovered wasn't normal. It wasn't rusted metal or an old pipe. It was smooth, reflective, and cold to the touch. He wiped away the remaining dirt, revealing a metallic pod, curved and seamless, unlike anything he had ever seen. "What the hell?" he muttered. His fingers traced along its surface, feeling a faint vibration underneath, like the pod itself was humming, alive. A small circular panel sat near the top, blinking softly with an eerie blue glow. His gut told him to stop, to call someone. Maybe the police, maybe the military. But something primal and unstoppable urged him forward. With a deep breath, he pressed his palm against the glowing panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sudden hiss. Jack leaped back as the pod shifted, the metal splitting apart in seamless segments, hissing with escaping gas. A faint mist poured out, dissipating into the warm summer air. His breath caught in his throat as the interior of the pod was revealed. Inside lay a girl, but she wasn't human. She was tall, longer-limbed than any woman he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered, an iridescent shade of pale green, almost glowing under the sunlight. Her hair was long and silken, flowing in white gold strands over her shoulders. A sleek, metallic bodysuit clung to her form, looking less like clothing and more like an organic extension of her body. Jack's mind screamed at him to run, to call for help. But his body was frozen, rooted in place by pure shock. Then she opened her eyes. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. Silver, liquid-like, shifting with an unnatural light, yet filled with something distinctly human. She gasped, her chest rising sharply as she drew in her first breath of fresh air. Her fingers twitched, grasping at the edges of the pod before she turned her gaze directly to him. Jack took an instinctive step back. Her lips parted, and in a voice that was soft, but filled with something unearthly, she spoke. "Where am I?" Jack swallowed hard, his mind struggling to form words. He had expected an alien, a monster, something out of a sci-fi horror film. But she looked lost. Earth," he managed to say. "You're on Earth." She blinked, processing the information. Then, suddenly, she shuddered, her entire body convulsing. Jack lurched forward instinctively, catching her before she collapsed onto the ground. Her skin was ice cold, her breathing erratic. Hey, stay with me," he said, shaking her lightly. She tried to speak, but her voice faded, her silver eyes fluttering shut. Panic surged in Jack's chest. He didn't know who she was, where she had come from, or how she had ended up buried in his backyard. But one thing was clear: she was in trouble. And like it or not, He was now the only person who could help her. Jack glanced around, half expecting someone, or something, to burst through the fence and take her away. But the world remained still, unaware that something otherworldly had just unfolded in a small suburban backyard. Taking a deep breath, he gathered the unconscious girl into his arms, cradling her light but strangely dense body. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but one thing was certain: his quiet life was over. And this was just the beginning. An unconscious mystery. Jack carried the alien girl inside his house, his arms tense as he tried to process what had just happened. An alien. A real, breathing alien. He had unearthed her in his backyard, like some sci-fi prophecy come to life. His mind screamed at him to call someone. NASA, the government, hell, even the local news. But something inside him told him that if he did, he might never see her again. And that thought unsettled him. He placed her carefully on his couch, her body unnaturally cold against his arms. Up close, she was even more breathtaking. Her pale green skin shimmered like moonlight on water, and her silver eyes, though now closed, had held an intelligence that haunted him. Jack grabbed a blanket, draping it over her before rushing to his thermostat, cranking up the heat. Was she sick? Could she even get sick? He had no idea. She wasn't human. For all he knew, she was dying right in front of him. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. He hesitated before kneeling beside her, pressing 2 fingers against her wrist. A pulse. Faint, but there. What the hell am I supposed to do? He muttered to himself. He reached for his phone, staring at the screen. Who could he even call? 911. No way. The government. They'd probably lock her in some underground lab. The military. They'd dissect her. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. No one could know. Not yet. Instead, he grabbed a wet cloth from the kitchen, dabbing her forehead, which was much colder than human skin should be. She stirred slightly at the touch, her fingers twitching. Then suddenly, her hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Jack gasped, but he didn't pull away. Her grip was strong, almost unnaturally so, but beneath the force, there was something desperate, something fragile. Her silver eyes fluttered open, locking onto his. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she spoke. "You save me." Her voice was weak, but laced with curiosity, as if she were struggling to piece together reality. Jack swallowed, forcing himself to speak past the lump in his throat. "I guess so." She exhaled, a shaky breath that sent a shiver through her body. Her fingers loosened on his wrist, but didn't let go entirely. Jack's thoughts raced. What was she running from? Who buried her in that pod? She tried to sit up but winced, gripping her side. Jack instinctively reached out, steadying her. "Whoa, take it easy," he said, his voice softer now. "You're not in great shape." She took another slow breath before looking at him again. "Where am I?" He sighed. "Earth. My house, specifically." "Earth," she repeated, as if tasting the word. Jack hesitated. "Do you remember how you got here?" A flicker of something crossed her silver eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but then she froze. A sharp hissing noise filled the air. Jack's instincts kicked in. He turned toward the window. Outside, beyond his fence, shadows moved in the trees. His blood ran cold. She saw them too. Her breath hitched, and she clutched his wrist tighter. "They found me," she whispered. Jack didn't ask who. He didn't need to. Whoever had buried her here didn't want her to be found. And now, they were coming to finish the job. The hunters in the shadows. Jack's pulse thundered in his ears. The girl's words echoed in his mind. "They found me." Outside, beyond the fence, the shadows moved again. Too fast, too precise. Not just someone out for a late-night jog. Something else. Jack's grip tightened instinctively on the alien girl's wrist. She was trembling. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell, But either way, it was a stark contrast to the strength she had shown earlier. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to think. "Who are they?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Her silver eyes darted toward the window, her jaw tightening. She knew exactly who they were, but she hesitated before answering. "No time," she murmured. "We have to leave." Jack nodded, his brain catching up with reality. Whoever they weren't here for small talk. A sudden, low-frequency hum vibrated through the walls. The sound wasn't loud, but it rattled Jack's chest like a subwoofer cranked too high. His gut screamed danger. He grabbed the girl's arm, guiding her to her feet. She stumbled, unsteady, and Jack instinctively looped an arm around her waist. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, barely. Jack scanned the room. His house wasn't exactly built for defense. One front door, 2 windows, and a back exit leading straight into the yard where they were waiting. No good. Then, a sharp metallic clang. Jack spun toward the front door. The handle was turning. A shadow passed over the peephole. Someone, or something, was on the other side. Jack didn't wait to find out who. He grabbed the alien girl's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. "Back door," he whispered. "Move." She struggled to keep up, still weak, but her legs worked well enough. They reached the kitchen just as a sharp, piercing whine filled the air. Jack turned just in time to see the front door explode inward. A pulse of blue energy rippled through the space where the door had been. The force sent splinters and debris flying across the living room. Jack barely had time to duck, shielding the girl as a piece of wood slashed across his arm. He hissed through clenched teeth. It burned. Not like fire, like electricity. Through the dust and swirling smoke, he saw them. The intruders. They weren't human. 3 figures entered through the destroyed doorway, their silhouettes sharp against the flickering streetlight outside. They stood tall, clad in sleek, armored exosuits that reflected the dim light. Their helmets were smooth, faceless, glowing faintly at the edges. And in their hands, weapons that hummed with the same blue energy that had just blasted his door apart. Jack barely had time to react before the nearest one raised its weapon. "Move," he barked, yanking the girl toward the back door. The blast hit the kitchen counter instead, sending silverware and glass shattering onto the tile floor. Jack slammed into the back door, fumbling with the lock. His hands were slick with sweat, his heart racing. It wouldn't budge. The girl stumbled against him, her breathing shallow. Jack turned to her, desperation in his voice. "Can you fight?" Her gaze flickered to the advancing figures, then back to him. She exhaled shakily. "Not yet," she admitted. "I need more time." Time they didn't have. Another energy pulse ripped through the air. Jack did the only thing he could. He grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife, and threw it with all of his strength. The blade spun through the air, not toward the armored intruders, but at the light fixture above them. Glass shattered, and the kitchen was plunged into darkness. Jack didn't wait to see their reaction. He kicked the back door with everything he had. The old wooden frame splintered, giving way just as another blast of blue light seared past his head. They were outside, running. The girl stumbled, but Jack caught her, pulling her along as fast as he could. They sprinted through the yard, past the spot where her cryopod still sat half buried in the dirt. Jack's truck was parked in the driveway. It wasn't much. An old Chevy, half rusted, stubborn as hell, but it was their only shot. "Get in," Jack yelled, yanking open the passenger door. The girl barely managed to climb inside. Jack dove into the driver's seat, twisting the keys in the ignition. The engine roared to life. Behind them, the armored figures burst into the yard. Jack floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched, kicking up dirt and gravel as the truck lurched forward. He gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on the road ahead. A sharp thud against the back of the truck made his stomach drop. "They're on us," the girl gasped. Jack jerked the wheel, sending the truck veering onto the main road. He caught a glimpse of something clinging to the back of the truck, one of the armored intruders, its glowing visor locked onto him. Jack's grip tightened on the wheel. "Hold on," he growled. He slammed the brakes. The sudden stop sent the intruder flying. It tumbled over the hood, crashing onto the pavement with a metallic crunch. Jack didn't wait to see if it got up. He gunned the accelerator. The truck tore down the darkened street, leaving the shattered remains of his front door and the unburied alien pod far behind. Only when they were miles away, the town now distant in the rearview mirror, did Jack dare to take a breath. The girl was still shaking beside him, clutching the dashboard. Her silver eyes were wide, flickering with 1,000 thoughts. Jack gritted his teeth. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. "All right," he finally said, his voice tight. "I think it's time you told me who the hell you are." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes. Then, in a voice so soft it barely reached him, she whispered, "I was never supposed to wake up." Jack's stomach turned. This was only the beginning. The truth beneath the stars. Jack's hands were tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he sped down the empty road. The truck's old engine rumbled, struggling against his lead foot. But Jack wasn't easing up. Not after what just happened. Not after his house was blown open, after men in alien armor chased them through the yard, after an unconscious girl from another world woke up buried in his backyard. And now she was sitting next to him, barely breathing, whispering words that sent a chill through his veins. "I was never supposed to wake up." Jack glanced at her, his gut twisting. The streetlights flashed across her face in rhythmic bursts, illuminating her pale green skin, silver eyes, and fragile expression. "What does that mean?" Jack demanded. "Who put you in that pod?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her gaze drifted out the window, toward the vast, open sky above them. And for the first time since he'd found her, she looked utterly lost. Jack exhaled, forcing himself to loosen his grip on the wheel. She was scared. More than that, she was running from something. And if those armored freaks were any clue, whatever she was running from was still hunting her. He took a sharp turn onto a side road, heading toward an old gas station on the outskirts of town. The place was abandoned this late at night. No cameras, no people, just a single flickering neon sign and a busted soda machine. Perfect. He pulled the truck into the lot and killed the engine. For a moment, the silence inside the cab felt heavier than it should have. Then Jack turned to her, his voice calmer now, but firm. "Look," he said, "I don't know who you are. I don't know what those guys back there wanted with you, but you need to start talking. Because right now, I'm risking my ass keeping you alive, and I don't even know your name." She hesitated, glancing down at her hands. They trembled slightly, her fingers pressing into the fabric of her suit as if grounding herself. Finally, she looked up. "My name is Lyra," she said softly. Jack nodded slowly. "All right, Lyra. Now tell me why the hell I just had to play fast and furious with an alien SWAT team." She exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was low, almost hesitant. "I was part of a mission," she said, "a deep space operation sent to observe developing planets. My people, we watch civilizations. We study them from a distance. We learn their progress, their strengths, their weaknesses." Jack's stomach twisted. "So what? You were spying on us?" "No." She shook her head quickly. "Not just your planet. All inhabited worlds. We never interfere." "Then why were you buried in my backyard?" Lyra's breath hitched. This time, when she spoke, there was something raw in her voice. "Because I was betrayed." Jack stiffened. She continued, her silver eyes clouded with memory. "My ship was attacked. Someone I trusted turned against me. They tried to erase me, to make sure I was never found again." Jack leaned forward. "You mean they were trying to kill you?" "No," She swallowed hard. Worse. They didn't want me dead. They wanted me forgotten. Jack's chest tightened. He had expected a fugitive, a runaway, maybe even an escaped prisoner. But this was something else entirely. "How long were you down there?" he asked quietly. Liara's fingers tightened. "I don't know." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus. Buried. Alive. Forgotten." And now, whoever had put her in that pod had realized their mistake. And they wanted her gone. Jack let out a slow breath, trying to process it all. "So these guys in the armor, the ones that just blew up my front door, are they the ones who did this to you?" Lara hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. "They're called the Virex," she said. "They work for the Dominion." Jack frowned. "The Dominion. The ruling force of my people," Liara said. "They control everything. Every planet we watch, every fleet we send. Their word is law." Jack's jaw clenched. "And you crossed them." Liara gave a small, bitter smile. "Something like that." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. She was running from an empire, a damned galactic dictatorship, and somehow she'd ended up in his backyard. A long silence stretched between them before Jack sighed. "Okay, so what do we do now?" Liara blinked at him. "What?" "You heard me," Jack said. "You've got a bunch of space hitmen after you, and I just pissed them off. So what's the plan?" She stared at him like she wasn't sure if he was joking. You don't have to help me," she said quietly. Jack scoffed. "Lady, that ship sailed the second I dug you out of the dirt." She was still looking at him, her silver eyes unreadable. For the first time, in who knows how long, someone wasn't running away from her. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right. First things first. We need to disappear." Lara tilted her head. "Disappear? You know, lay low, stay out of sight. If these guys can track you, we need to figure out how." Jack glanced at her suit. "That thing got a tracker, or something." Liara stiffened. Her fingers ran over the fabric before stopping at a small, almost imperceptible seam along her forearm. She exhaled sharply. "Damn it." Jack's stomach dropped. "You're tied." "Yes," she whispered. "They can trace me." Jack cursed under his breath. "All right. Can you get rid of it?" Lara hesitated, then nodded. "But I'll need tools. A blade. Something sharp." Jack reached under his seat, pulling out a hunting knife. "Will this do?" She stared at the blade for a moment before taking it carefully. Her hands were steady now, her expression focused. "This will work." Jack watched as she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the small embedded device just beneath her skin. Without hesitation, she pressed the knife against her arm and sliced. Jack barely held back a wince as she dug the blade under the implant, her face impassive despite the blood welling around it. Finally, with a sharp flick, she pulled the device free. The tiny metal chip blinked weakly in her palm, still transmitting. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed the device and chucked it into the gas station's dumpster. Lyra let out a slow breath, pressing a piece of cloth against her wound. "That should buy us time," she muttered. Jack sighed. "Great. Now we just have to figure out how to stop a damn intergalactic empire from killing us." Lyra gave him a sideways glance. "You're surprisingly calm about all this." Jack let out a humorless laugh. "Trust me, I'm freaking out on the inside." She smiled, a small, tired, but genuine smile. For the first time since this all started, Jack realized she wasn't just an alien. She was a person, and she needed help. Jack exhaled, gripping the steering wheel again. "All right," he muttered. "Let's find somewhere safe before those guys realize we just ditched their tracker." Liara nodded, her expression more determined now. As Jack pulled the truck back onto the road, they both knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close.